1. So 3 years ago, in May 2013, my dog and best friend George was put down. He had battled with cancer and had lost feeling from his waist down, so he was in pretty bad shape. I was in the room with the vet as he euthanized him, and I held his paw as he breathed his last. George was a very loyal, yet somewhat dumb, at times, yellow lab, and I adored him. We lived in a 2-story house, with our stairs cut into 3 sections, with small flat parts dividing them. Almost every night, George, while he was still physically able to, would sleep on the platform closest to the bottom floor. After I had gone to bed, I would hear him bound up the stairs, and then ultimately settle on the platform. Sometimes he would climb the entire staircase, and sit at my doorway, looking at me. He waited there until I raised my hand to him, waved at him and said, "Hey, George." He would wag his tail and then leave, as if he was worried about me and wanted to check in on me. After he died, I was a wreck. Even though I was a teenager, George was still my first animal. I got him when I was 7. I had ever had, and even more so, the first animal of mine I had ever seen die firsthand. It really wrecked my life for a good while, and I didn't really know how to feel. Well, the first night he died, we had a little funeral service, and I helped bury him outside of our house. I was really dumbfounded as to what was really going on, and went to bed soon after that. I cried in bed because I missed him so much. About half an hour after I got into bed, I heard the familiar bounding up the stairs that George used to make. I was, at first, a little startled, but then it made me feel peaceful. The heavy steps ran up the stairs and to my doorway, but stopped there. At once I knew it was George. I sat up in bed and looked at my doorway and said, "Hey, George, I'm okay." A few moments after that, it sounded as if the footsteps led George back down the stairs. I cried a little bit more. Not out of sadness, but because, even in death, my best friend still wanted to make sure I was okay. It happened a few more times after that, but it's not happened too often since then. I guess the point in this post was to tell you guys that not every ghost or spirit you see is bad out there. There are still those from the other side who want to make sure you're okay. Yes, I believe that there are evil spirits who wish to do us harm, but there are just as many good spirits who wish to keep us safe. Have a great night, guys. P.S. I miss you, George. 2. What I'm about to tell you is one of the many paranormal things that happened to me in a time span of 11 years now. To give you some backstory, it all began in summer of 2004 when my grandparents moved into an old bungalow on a rather quiet island. It's not exactly an island, as it's not in the ocean or something. It's rather just a small part of land that's completely surrounded by a river and has 2 bridges, one for entering and one for exiting. On there is also a sea which is public for bathing or camping and, of course, my grandparents' bungalow. No other residents live there, just my grandparents. In winter and fall it's pretty quiet there, because no one is around except for a few cars that drive through. Literally translated, it's called Raven's Island. Sounds pretty made up. I know. So to get back to the story. When they moved there, things started to get weird after some time. Objects started moving. Things would get destroyed. You could hear voices when nobody was around, or breathing, and you could also see shadows. Lots of other stuff happened, and is still happening. But that's another story. I was around 5 at the time. I'm female. You could now say I was imagining, but since it's still occurring, and I'll be 18 soon, I wouldn't say that's the case. After a year, my grandfather died of severe cancer. But it had nothing to do with his death, since it started before his death. It's really hard to make this a shorter story since so many things happened, and it's such a long and compact story. To make it short, After 2 years, when things started to get even worse and the spirits became physical, we bought a Ouija board to communicate with them. We found out that there are 7 spirits living in my grandma's bungalow. 1 elderly woman, 3 men, and 3 kids, one of them a girl. They even told us their names. Afterwards, things started to calm down. Everything always happened at my grandma's, and never at my house except once. Which is what I'm going to tell you, because it still haunts me to this day, as it's something that happened in my room, my private place, and I never liked that idea, as I always thought that at home, these things would never happen. It was around 3 years later, and I was 8 years old. After all this time, you start to kind of get used to this, so it wasn't as creepy at my grandma's as it used to be, and since I visited her every weekend, it was a part of me too. It was around 10 p.m. that night, and I was in my bed sleeping, as it was a school day. My little brother used to sneak into my room at night to steal my Game Boy, and I was always waking up to him sneaking through my games and telling him to get the fuck out and let me sleep. So I started to lock my door at night. And that night, I woke up to someone making loud noises in my room. I thought I forgot to lock my door, and that it was my brother again. My room is pretty big, so I started to search for him, and I found him at my cabinet, fumbling with his hand. I wasn't thinking about that, as I was too angry with him being in my room again. So I started to loudly ask him what the fuck he was doing in my room. But he ignored me, and started to walk through my room, first to my window, then to the door. Then he turned around, walked in a circle, ignoring me the whole time I was yelling, as I was getting more and more angry, especially when I'm tired. I again asked, and again, what he was doing here, and told him to leave, and wasn't thinking about all the weird movements he made. He then went to my TV and laid himself in front of it, stretching his arms and legs up in the air. I was so fed up at that time that I turned my little bedside lamp on, and went to him to shove him outside. When I got there, I realized that there was nobody. I was completely alone in my room. I then went to my door to check if it was locked. It was. So what the fuck just happened? Who was in my room? I ran to my bed and threw myself into it, observing every inch of my room from there. Nothing. I didn't sleep that night. And I didn't go tell my parents either, as my room was at the end of the house and I had to walk through a dark corridor. And that just wasn't what I was in the mood for doing. So I just sat there the whole night, lights on, and thinking about every detail. I didn't even stand up to turn my TV on. Maybe it was one of the boys from my grandma's, or maybe not. I don't know. And I never asked. I also never felt a negative energy, nor did I feel threatened. It was just the thing that it had never happened at my home before, and the fact that I was all alone, which creeped me out so much. 3. Back in 2003, I had just enrolled as a first year in an old boarding school in my country. The buildings were old, and there were plenty of large and old-looking trees in the school compound. There was even an out-of-bounds area, just behind the staff's housings, with ruins of old buildings and a small forest. Every night from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m., we were required to attend preparatory classes, where we would do our own revisions and any homework in the academic building. It was quite common that some of the students in my class would fall asleep towards the end of the prep class. So being the young teenagers we were, we would often pull pranks on these sleeping boys by quietly leaving the class and leaving them asleep in the dark classroom alone. Often, they would wake up at midnight and hurriedly run back to the dormitories in the darkness of late night. We would often laugh at those who were asleep, and they too would laugh back until one fateful night. Somehow that night, I became one of those who fell asleep in class and were left behind in the darkness. As I woke up, I looked around my class, in the darkness, and realized that I had been on the other end of the prank this time. Luckily, I saw that 6 other classmates were also sleeping at their desks and were left behind. I stand up and find my way in the dark to each of them and woke them up so that we could return to the dormitories together. 5 of them were easily woke, but the last boy was not responding in any way, as if he were too deep in slumber to notice anything. After minutes of trying to wake him, ending in failure, all 6 of us decided to leave him sleeping in the classroom and return back to our dorms. As we walk in the cold, dark walkway, the chilly night wind blew and the big trees swayed in the wind. We chatted to keep our spirits up until we reached our dorms. However, when we arrived, we were shocked to see the boy we had tried to wake was chatting happily with other classmates who had returned earlier. We asked him how did he arrive so fast when he was still sleeping when we left the classroom. He looked at us bewildered. He said he went back to the dorm with the rest of the class when the prep class ended and left the 6 of us sleeping. I was angry at this point and insisted that there were 7 boys, including me, in that class, and the other 5 boys too insist that they all tried to wake up the last boy and confirmed it was him in that classroom. In the end, all of us just suddenly went quiet and go to bed. Until all of us graduated from the school 5 years later, we still couldn't figure out who was the boy sleeping with us in the classroom. That school has a lot of scary things, from old trees to old ruins of buildings, but this particular thing that I encountered is the weirdest of all. 4. Okay, I'm sure this will get some, "Oh, that sounds so cliché," or "That's fake." But it was real to me, as I saw it happen to me and around me. It's a short story, but I still remember most of it like it happened to me tonight. I was in middle school and my mom had just remarried with the guy we will call Rob. And he had us move into his place, which we were super happy about because we lived in government-assisted living places, and none were, how we say, friendly. Well, after moving in, I start my new life. In elementary school, at 3rd grade, I met Ned. Now I know what you're thinking. You said middle school. Why are you going to elementary? Well, it's because of Ned that it happened to me. Years passed by, and we started middle school. It was the 6th grade, our last year, and I had a science project, and my partner was, you guessed it, Ned. He invited me over to work on it, which was cool because we lived super close to each other, so walking was no issue. When I got there, his mom was leaving in this little tight red dress, saying she had a date. Yes, I had a huge crush on his mom, and told her she wouldn't come back for a while. After she left, Ned said, "Hey, have you ever used a Ouija board?" I replied, "No, I never have." Now keep in mind, I was young, and to me ghosts and whatnots were things you see on TV, and I didn't think they were real. So Ned said to me, "Let's call some friends over because it's more fun with more people." And he hops on the phone making calls. After 30 minutes of waiting, everyone shows up, and by then the sun had set, and it was nice and dark outside. Ned tells everyone that we are going to do a Ouija board, and he pulls out some candles. A friend of his, who he called to come over, laughs and says, "That crap is so fake. I bet you got someone hiding here to scare us." So my friend Ned said to go check my place all you want. It is just us here. And we begin to look all over the place, opening closets, looking in the bathrooms, and yes, even looking under the beds. Satisfied, we begin by lighting the candles and placing them around the room, and turn the lights off. Ned's room was fairly small, with a sliding door closet, and a window which was quite plain because he wasn't allowed to have posters on his wall, and it was small enough for the candlelight to creepily light his room up. We begin by Ned explaining the rules, but at the end of his explanation he adds, "If you're asking questions, don't let go. Ever." We all laugh and begin by asking questions. Of course, we all start going, "You're moving it," and laughing, so this guy named Bobby said I will ask it a question that I only know the answer to. I can't recall the question totally, but he asked about something that happened in his family, avoiding a yes or no question, figuring it would be a 50-50 chance. As the pointer started spelling the answer out, we could see Bobby's face drain of color and pull his hands off, yelling, "Fuck this." Right as he did that, the sliding closet door slams open and closed a few times, and the window curtains blow up like there was wind doing it. Needless to say, we all got the hell out of the room yelling, "Oh shit," or "What the fuck," and left Ned's place because no one was going to go back in, even Ned. Well, I went home, and Ned said he would stay with one of his friends that lived close to him. We said our goodbyes, and I make my way home still creeped out at what happened. And I wasn't going to tell my mom and stepfather what happened because they are highly religious, and I knew I would get yelled at for doing something like that. After I get back home, everything went back to normal, and I even calmed down and ate some dinner and played some Mario on my Nintendo till bedtime. When bedtime came, I got in and my mom turned my lights off, and off to a wonderful sleepy time I went. I am a heavy sleeper, because when we have a home alarm, and a few times it would go off, I would never hear it, so I was out blissfully, till for some reason I woke up abruptly. I was cold, so very cold, and I had no covers on, which is strange because I tend to clutch them around my neck. My room was dark, and the only light I had was from my alarm clock next to my bed, which was reading 3 a.m. And it was very quiet to me, which wasn't new in that house. I blinked a few times, letting my eyes adjust from the sleep to somewhat seeing in my room. I looked to the left and right side of my bed, thinking my covers had fallen off, but they weren't there. And while I was doing this, it kept getting colder and colder. My hairs on the back of my neck were standing up, and I was getting scared. I slowly crept to the foot of my bed, seeing my covers nicely folded. Yes, nicely folded at the bottom of my bed. I was thinking to myself, what the hell? I reached down and grabbed them, and right as I started pulling them up, I heard this deep, demonic laugh. I pulled the covers up over my head and curl up scared out of my mind, but still end up falling asleep somehow. That morning, I make my way to the bus stop where I meet up with Ned and tell him what happened to me, with the folded bed covers and the demon laughing, and he has this look on his face, as he had said the same thing happened to him last night. After that, we decided to never play with a Ouija board ever again, and to this day, I still get creeped out about this. But I haven't had anything like it ever happen to me again. But I will say this, I am a believer from that day on. 5. So I was living in a somewhat old house in a historic town with my mom and a roommate who was almost never home. Well, these events happened over the course of about 18 months. So things started out pretty simple, like hearing footsteps upstairs while home alone, or while everyone was downstairs. Sometimes the birds that our roommate owned would start to straight up panic for no reason, and quite often pictures would go crooked on the walls, despite us fixing them constantly. But over time, things would happen like breezes on your neck out of nowhere, or clothes being tugged, or even light pushes on your back. These things were mostly felt by my mom, but I felt them too, just less often. Then one night, around 3 a.m., while I was completely knocked out of sleep, on my pull-out couch downstairs, my mom started downstairs to get a drink of water, when she was pushed hard in the back and took a tumble down the stairs. Luckily, she missed the radiator at the bottom and walked away with only temporary bruises, but the sudden shock of her fall woke me up from my sleep so fast and so suddenly that I bruised my heart from the rapid pulse change, confirmed by a doctor. It was after this that we started taking the idea of spirits more serious, so we decided to set up an EVP session for the next night. It started with the usual stuff like what's your name, when did you die, do you even know that you're dead, etc. But when I stopped the session halfway through to check for responses, I got nothing. So for the second half I decided to get creative. I asked that if the spirit needed energy to communicate, that it should channel some from me. After I asked that, I felt a little strange, so after a few more questions I played back what I recorded. Turns out that clear as day after I asked it, you hear a voice saying, "I'd like to use it." And it's a voice I've never heard before in my life. So we show the recording to our landlord, who says that without a doubt it was the voice of her mother, who she forgot to tell us before died in the house. But this is not the end of the story, because after this activity picks up even more, to the point that one day both me and my mom are in the living room at around noon. So it's bright and sunny out when, suddenly, a basketball-sized glowing orb appears on one side of the room and floats around, does some loops, and flies into a clock on the other side. Both me and my mom see this and decide right then and there that it's time to move out. So a month later we did just that, and haven't been back since. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, Episode 4. Well, if you got through that first story without crying, you might be evil. Because I sure as hell couldn't, I had to keep stopping. I'm not even much of a pet person, but my sister used to have a dog, a little fella. I was never overly fond of him when he was alive, but I was certainly never cruel to him. I'd always pet him whenever I saw him, and with the understanding that, okay, I'll show you some love right now, and you go away and leave me alone. Which, of course, he wouldn't do, but we at least had the understanding. And then he passed away, and I was kind of shocked by just how overcome I was with grief. I'd go visit my sister's house, and there'd be this eerie, uncomfortable silence, because I was just so used to the dog, barking at me and he'd come out and he'd see it was me and he'd be like, "Oh, okay, it's you. Well, come on, come over here and pet me." And I missed him. So the story one really got to me because of that. And they have another dog now. He's just as rambunctious as the old one, maybe a little more so because, well, he's quite young. And of course I have that same understanding with the new dog. Okay, it's TIFU tomorrow. So until next time, thank you very much for listening. And take very good care of yourselves.